विशाखान्वितां च हे कृष्णकरुणा सिन्धो दीनबन्धो जगत्पते गोपेश गोपिकान्त राधाकान्त नमोऽस्तुते तप्तकाञ्चन गौराङ्गी राधे वृन्दावनेश्वरी वृषभानुसुते देवी प्रणमामि हरिप्रिये वञ्चकल्पतरुभ्यश्च कृपा सिन्धुभ्येव च पतितानां पावनेभ्यो वैष्णवेभ्यो नमो नमः। जय श्री कृष्ण चैतन्य प्रभु नित्यानंद श्री अद्वैत गदाधर श्रीवासादि गौरभक्तवृंद हरे कृष्णा कृष्ण कृष्ण हरे 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 राम 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 हरे हरे. Let me share my screen.
Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
Is audio clear? Hare Krishna.
Yes, Prabhu.
Thank you, Mataji.
Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Reading this morning from Canto 2, Chapter 3, entitled Pure Devotional Service, text number 20.
Yes, Prabhu. Dulath Prabhu.
Prabhu, you can mute yourself.
Yeah, sure. I'll be doing.
And please increase the font size also of the text, Prabhu. Okay, thank you.
Prabhu, it's not audible, Prabhu.
This section of chapter
Not
3
audible, Prabhu.
is the concluding section.
Font size, can you
Section
please
in which
Still need some more?
Can you please increase the font size, Prabhu?
Yes, Prabhu. It's already 2:30.
Gita Goswami is
Thank you.
he's described already the superiority of devotional service above all other processes. And like in an ecstatic way, his happiness is so astounding that to consider anything other than devotional service is, these last verses, he's dismissing or decrying anything other. In Nectar Devotion, Rupa Goswami writes that bhakti is exclusive. But where love is given to the personality of Godhead, it's exclusive, it's very focused, and therefore shelter is not taken elsewhere, or the energy of the swimming pool of life is not directed towards other things. So, in one sense, that's what these verses are doing. That if there's any hesitation or contemplation other than pure devotional service, he's cutting off those channels. When one engages in devotional service, it should be very focused, very strongly rendered, keeping the bhakti of the just a little bit the context, one famous verse from this third chapter, There's a number of often quoted verses, but just a few verses preceding text 20 is this one where both by the rising and the setting of the sun it decreases the duration of life of everyone, except one who utilizes the time by discussing the topics of the all-good personality of Godhead. So that's text 17 of chapter 3. It sets the mood for the rest of the verses of the chapter. Devotional service exclusively rendered unto the personality of Godhead has a virtue that nothing else can compare to it. The rising and setting of the sun draws that person closer to Krishna, because the activities done throughout the day in and day out, are the hearing and chanting of the topics of Krishna, which bring one to Krishna. And if that's neglected, then what is achieved? One's duration of life has been decreased by one day, and then another day, another. So each day progressively is drawing one closer to death, whereas for a devotee, each day that passes, one is being drawn closer and closer to immortality. Very interesting. Mortality and immortality. Just down the hearing and chanting process, the Bhagavad Marg. So then, what about somebody that doesn't? What about the values of persons that want to live a long duration of life? Because they're not thinking about eternal life, they're thinking long duration of life. Don't trees have a long duration of life? Well, yes, trees have a long duration of life, but they don't breathe. Do not the bellows of a blacksmith breathe? Well, the bellows of the blacksmith breathe, but they're not enjoying life by sexual and sensual pleasures. Do not the beasts discharge semen and eat? Then the hogs, dogs, camels, asses verse. Svavid vra hoshtra karai. Men who are like hogs, dogs, camels, and asses. Praise those men who never listen to the pastimes of Lord Sri Krishna, the deliverer from all evils. So that's been discussed. Now, text 20. One who has not listened to the messages about the prowess and marvelous acts of the personality of Godhead, and one who has not sung or loudly chanted the worthy songs about the Lord, is to be considered to possess ear holes like holes of snakes, and a tongue like the tongue of a frog. Not very complimentary. I'll read the purport. These purports are classic. They're repeated over and over again. It's like poetry. In the purports, Prabhupada has used alliteration, he's used metaphors, he's used similes, although it's prose, it's just so beautifully composed. And therefore devotees like to read these purports again and again and again, just from the literary embellishment point of view. And of course the message is very powerful. Here's what Prabhupada writes in his purport. Devotional service to the Lord is rendered by all limbs or parts of the body. First point. Devotional service is Rishikena Rishikesha Sevanam. Bhakti Uchate. All limbs, all the parts of the body. It is the transcendental dynamic force of the spirit soul. That's another definition of devotional service. So, first definition, engaging the senses in service of the master of the senses. Another definition is the transcendental dynamic force of the spirit soul. So although we're using the body, what's driving the body, in the case of devotional service, it's the transcendental dynamic force of the spirit soul. So it's very powerful. Therefore, a devotee is engaged 100% in the service of the Lord. This phrase 100%, later on he uses the word in toto, he uses the word completely absorbed. So his Tivra Bhakti message is being repeated in a thematic way. The devotional service isn't casual. It's very active, very concentrated, very dynamic, 100%. 100% devotional service doesn't mean that's for sannyasis and brahmacharis. 100% means 100% for anyone. Sensual power, fully engaged in service to Krishna with transcendental dynamic force of the spirit soul. That's what devotional service is. Then, one can engage in devotional service when the senses of the body are purified in relation with the Lord. So how do the senses that are materially contaminated become purified? Connecting the senses to the Supreme Pure. So the senses become purified, and through that purification process, devotional service means engaging purified senses in the advanced stage. And one can render service to the Lord with the help of all the senses. The second time he's making the point. All the limbs, all the parts of the body, all the senses engaged in service to the Lord. As such, the senses and the action of the senses are to be considered impure or materialistic as long as they are employed only in sense gratification. The purified senses are engaged not in sense gratification, but in service of the Lord in toto. Same senses, differently directed. The directing of the senses is from consciousness, the conscious choice of serving the Lord, and the conscious choice of not pandering to the demands and dictates of the senses, but extending the senses for service to Krishna only. The Lord is the supreme with all senses, and the servitor, who is part and parcel of the Lord, also has the same senses. Service to the Lord is the completely purified use of the senses as described in the Bhagavad Gita. The Lord imparted instructions with full senses, and Arjuna received them with full senses. And thus there was a perfect exchange of sensibility and logic, a sensible and logical understanding between the master and the disciple. Now here Prabhupada is using, almost like a poetic way, sense and sensibility and logical. So the direct meaning of sense means that the organ, the instrument for perception. That's the senses, working senses, knowledge acquiring senses. Then he's using the word sense, kind of like a repeat of the same word, but in this case with a different meaning. Sensible, meaning based upon reason and logic. So that's the mind. The mind reasons and constructs things with some kind of logic. So, although it's on the sensual platform, the senses serving Krishna, the master of the senses, behind the senses there's sensible and logical contemplation. Perfect exchange of sensible and logical understanding between the master and the disciple. Then he speaks about the understanding, spiritual understanding. There's nothing like an electrical charge from the master to the disciple, as foolishly proclaimed by some propaganda mongers. Then he goes back. Everything is full of sense and logic, reason. Here's sense having these two meanings: the instrument of gathering knowledge, and the mind that considers why should I, how should I, what's the meaning. Both, in other words, it's a double sense of the same word, a double meaning of the same word. But both faculties are to be employed in devotional service. That's the message Prabhupada wants his reader to receive. We do things practically, at the same time inwardly we contemplate very thoughtfully, very carefully, very reasonably, very logically. Devotional service doesn't abandon logic and reason. And certainly devotional service doesn't mean sense gratification, while it does mean engagement of the senses. Everything is full of sense and logic. And the exchange of views between the master and the disciple is possible only when the reception is submissive and real. So now he's introduced in his purport another component, very important, because he said it's only possible to get the sense and logic, to get that proper consciousness behind the activity of serving Krishna, when the disciple is in a submissive mood and there's a real connection established between the disciple and the spiritual master. Only possible. This full of sense and logic experience is only possible when the reception is submissive and real. Repeats the point. In the Chaitanya Charitamrita it is said that one should receive the teaching of Lord Chaitanya with intellect and full senses, so that one can logically understand the great mission. It's not one minus the other, or vice versa. The the thoughtfulness behind devotional service and the activity of devotional service. Both need to be there. Rishikesha Rishikena Sevana. The senses serving the master of the senses. So it's practical. Prabhupada speak this way, making the same point. It's practical activity. Some people think of bhakti as some kind of sentimentalism. No, it's not some kind of sentimentalism. It's practical activity. I mean, explicitly, it's senses and objects of the senses meeting one another and doing something, practical activity. The execution of the contemplation of devotion is the expression of the devotion, devotional service with senses. At the same time it's with senses, this section of the third chapter of the Bhagavatam, Canto 2, is telling us it's not sense gratification, it's not sensual attraction. Although it may look like, just like playing musical instruments or anything, cooking, dancing, singing.
Hare Krishna. Anybody wants to say any comment or? Yes, Sarvari Mataji.
Hare Krishna Prabhu, a very beautiful lecture. And, it's very deep actually, and like the sentence which says that devotional service, it is something very sincere, and it is a practical activity also, where 100% of the senses needs to be utilized in the service of the Lord. So, that is very nice. Thank you, Prabhu. Hare Krishna.
Thank you, Mataji. Anybody else want to say any question or any comment? Yes, Kumarika Mataji, please continue.
Hare Krishna Prabhu. When I read Prabhupada's purports, I'm not able to see the poetry in it. But when Maharaj is pointing out to us how nicely Prabhupada has written, the very sentence that devotional service is the transcendental dynamic force of the soul. So it is not that only the body is working mindlessly. The driving force is the soul. And the logic and reason behind the senses, just it is not that mindless again, doing our devotional service through our senses and the body, but it is the mind and the logical reasoning why we are doing what we are doing. That is that sort of understanding I'm getting when I'm listening to Maharaj. So that shows his great realization. And so the difference from just reading by ourselves and hearing from the pure devotees is very, very evident when we listen to the pure devotees like him.
Thank you, Mataji. Very nicely said. Channakesha Prabhu.
Hare Krishna Prabhu.
Hare Krishna Prabhuji.
Today I like from this lecture from Maharaj, one who is not listening the message of Lord and not chanted loudly of Hare Krishna Mahamantra, then it is considered as Ears are snake holes and the tongue is like a frog. Oh, that's it, Prabhu. Thank you.
Yes. Thank you, Prabhu. Yeah, I have one point to mention, actually. So majorly, yeah, Maharaj, he was nicely explaining about everything is full of sense and logic. So then again, he will tell like how the exchanges happens between the master and uh, his disciple. So the submission is a very important point. So without the submission, like the same thing he explains between how Krishna and Arjuna, how the message has been delivered and how message has been received. So the major, the capturing point here is the submission. So I like that point. Yeah, any other devotees? Yogal Krishna Prabhu, would you like to share something?
Prabhu. No, no point today, Prabhu.
Thank you, Prabhu. Harisham Prabhu.
Hare Krishna. Sorry, my phone got locked, so
Hare
time
Krishna Prabhu.
locked. Nothing, Prabhu. Like it's just the same point echoed by. I just want to echo Monica Mataji's uh, appreciation of Maharaj reading of Srila Prabhupada's purport. When we hear how great personalities relish Bhagavatam, uh, so I also get inspired uh, to go deeper when we read Prabhupada, when I read Prabhupada's purport. That's appreciation, like how he relishes each and every word and meaning behind. Like I can skip when I read, I can skip over many things like sense, sensibility, all those things. But how Maharaj is looking the connection between even the words, not only the connection between the different things which are expressed, but even among the words, how Prabhupada is using each and every word, apt words, uh, to describe things. And when Maharaj is bringing it out, it helps one appreciate further Srila Prabhupada's purport and how we are fortunate, I am fortunate to actually to have access to such transcendental purports. That's my appreciation, something which, yeah, I felt like getting me attracted to reading Prabhupada's purport.
Yeah, that's true, Prabhu. Thank you. Any last comment from anyone?
Hare Krishna Prabhu.
Hare Krishna Prabhuji. Sanatan
Very
Prabhu.
nicely. Actually, the devotional service involves senses, mind, and soul. And that is actually when we chant, I read in Chaitanya Bhagavat that all the senses are involved. They call that the force, the air which comes out of chanting. It touches the skin, then ears, then even eyes. All the senses are involved in chanting. That's the dynamic force of the soul. So it's not just chanting, only tongue is involved. All the senses are involved. And I like one thing, when he told when you preach, you should preach the intellect and the senses. That the intellect part that I like very much. Hare Krishna. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Prabhuji. Okay, fine then. It's 7 o'clock. if there are no other points, I think we can close the call for today. Thank you everyone for joining. We'll meet again tomorrow. Vanchakalpatarubhyasya कृपा सिन्धुभ्येव च पतितानां पावनेभ्यो वैष्णवेभ्यो नमो नमः. अनंत कोटि वैष्णव वृंद की जय. नामाचार्य श्रीलता ठाकुर की जय. जगत गुरु श्रील प्रभुपाद की जय. हरे कृष्ण.